all of this is our collective failure. I know we've all had dinner table conversations where we've ended the conversation saying, hey, this is the fault of teachers or principals or policymakers or the government. But the truth is, we are also to blame as parents, as students, as consumers of this education, as citizens of this country. We have to take that blame. But I also sit here today with immense hope. I've seen glimmers, I've seen changes, I've seen proof points that tell me that the future does not have to be like this. I work for an organization that runs a teaching fellowship. Every year, almost 500 fresh college graduates and young professionals in our country sign up for 2 years to serve as teaching resources in these very same government schools and low-income private schools that I just showed you across 7 cities in our country. In these 2 years, these fellows develop their abilities as teachers, but through that, they also develop key leadership skills. Skills that they believe will serve them well no matter what career they join post the fellowship. We call these fellows our Didis and Bhaiyas. And over the years, I've taken many people who, like you, might have never visited a government school classroom with me to visit the classrooms of these Didis and Bhaiyas. And 2 things happen when they first step into these schools. The first thing that happens is that they're in awe. Does that sound contradictory based on the picture that I just painted? I know. Well, the truth is when they first walk into these communities, they're a little bit in a hole, and they're looking around, and there's signs of poverty, and there's broken glass and trash, and the smell of urinals, and it is fairly daunting. But just about 10 minutes in, as they start seeing the effort of Didis and Bhaiyas, and they start seeing that kids, in spite of all of these complex challenges, are actually learning, they are filled with an overwhelming sense of hope. And so they are in awe. And the second thing that happens immediately after this is there is a barrage of questions that are thrown at me. What is it that these kids are learning? What are the lesson plans? What's the pedagogy, the curriculum? What are the tests and assessments they're using? What's the teacher training you've given to these fellows? What are the teaching and learning materials? What, and what? The big idea I want to leave with you today is this. While these whats are important, I found that they're not going to help us solve this crisis. I think we need to stop asking what and start asking why and how. Leadership expert Simon Sinek says something very similar. He says that organizations inspire and leaders achieve much more when they lead not with the what, but with the why and the how. Interestingly, what I've seen in the education sector could not be much farther away from the truth. I found that we've spent decades asking the what questions. What is the right curriculum? What is the right pedagogy? The right tests? The right teacher training? But I think we need to stop asking what. We actually need to start asking why. Why is it that we're educating in the first place? What is the purpose of education? And once we've renegotiated that, we need to really rethink how. How is it that teaching and learning needs to shift to make sure we're delivering on that larger purpose? So let's get into this a little bit more. Over the years, I've had the privilege of interviewing lots of young college graduates and MBA graduates, and I always ask them about their academic and career journeys. Interestingly, thousands of them tell me exactly the same things. I wanted to study X, but then I ended up studying Y. Oh yes, I'm an engineer, but obviously I never wanted to work as an engineer. Oh, I've got a great job lined up for me post my MBA. It's not actually what I want to do though, but hopefully later in life, I'll ultimately end up doing what I think is my true calling. Sounds familiar? In 2012, an Australian nurse, Bronnie Ware, wrote a book on the top 5 regrets of people who were dying. You see, she worked in palliative care with patients in their last few days. I know this sounds a little bit morbid and I promised you lots of hope, but bear with me, we'll get there. So what are the top 5 regrets of people right before they're dying? Well, some of these things we already probably know. I wish I had worked less, I wish I'd had more fun, I wish I'd spent more time with family. But the number one regret people have right before dying is this. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. My fear is that our education system today is pushing us into a life of expectations, into a life of tests and marks and exams, and we're being herded into careers that others are telling us are the right careers for us. My fear is that we're ultimately going to end up unhappy and we will die with the same regrets that Nurse Bronnie Ware warned us of. If we really want to shift the state of education in our country, we have to start talking about the why and what is the larger purpose that we really want education to fulfill. Our Didis and Bhaiyas believe that the purpose of education is for us to realize our full potential and to work in collaboration with others to help them realize their full potential so that ultimately our country can realize its greatest potential. And I've seen thousands of times that when we do that, we achieve so much more than just academic outcomes. I've seen this in Deepak and Vishal, who come from communities very similar to what I shared about. But today they are studying in the United World College on a full scholarship. I've seen this in Kajal, who works with Victory Art Foundation kids who are mentally and physically challenged, even though she herself comes from a very vulnerable background herself. And I've seen this in Qasim, who played for the under-16 Mumbai cricket team. I've seen this in Muskan, a caring, compassionate child who I first met 4 years ago. She was the lead in a play that her Didi was directing. See, Muskan has always been a hardworking child. She's always been good at studies. But her Didis and Bhaiyas exposed her to art and music and poetry and singing and dancing, and she loved all of it. But Muskan comes from a tough family, a family that lives in Tughlakabad. Her father works in a shop and her mother works extra hours with kids to earn some additional income. And most adults around her have told her to work hard and have told her that kids who study art are not hardworking. But Muskan in her TEDx talk, yes, Muskan has been on a TEDx talk in which she shares that she feels powerful when she's on stage. And that is something she doesn't want to give up, that she wants more. She wants to do more and be more. Recently, Muskan drafted her resume and sent this heartfelt letter to many schools in the city. The letter said, I believe that despite my background, I have the potential to be a change maker. I want to fight for an education that nurtures me into a better human being and into a better leader. I'll work hard on my academics and on my performances. I'll contribute to the school culture and I will empower those who want to learn. I don't know what the process is, but please let me interview with you so I can have a place in this school. As of 2 weeks ago, Muskan now attends a top school in Delhi. But not all kids are even as fortunate as Muskan. Shivam was a student in one of our other classrooms whose father died when he was just 12 years old. And so Shivam had to start working at a petrol pump to support his family. By the time Shivam was 9th grade, he couldn't keep up school and work. And so he stopped going to school. This was 3 years ago. A year ago, we heard from Shivam again. He said that he was much more settled and he wanted to start his education again. He enrolled himself in the National Open School and he believes that he can now study and work and that this additional education will help him achieve his larger dreams. But what's really special is that Shivam felt he has the values and the tools that he needs to succeed and that he'll be all right. Now, isn't that what the purpose of education really should be? To be able to fight life's battles, to have the courage to be brave, to be able to be resourceful and creative, to know when to reach out for help, to be able to take care of yourself, but also others around you, like Shivam took care of his own family. In our education system, Shivam is not considered a good data point. He's a dropout. But if the purpose of education was much larger, then Shivam would be passing with flying colors. I want us to think about that for a second. Everyone from CEOs to bureaucrats to students that I've spoken to truly believe that the purpose of education is for us to be able to be ready for the world. No one has argued that. But if that's the truth, then our report cards need to reflect that. We need to redraft our report cards. We need to measure what matters. We need to stop measuring just enrollment rates or pass percentages or college graduation. We need to start measuring things that matter, like the ability of our kids to think critically and communicate effectively, the ability of our kids to be job ready, the ability of our kids to be life ready. Our report cards need to measure values and happiness and mental well-being and social mobility. And we know that this is possible because countries around the world today are experimenting with this and are finding success. Teaching and pedagogy can make a difference, yes. The what's can make a difference, yes. But if we really want to unlock the true potential of what we can do with education in our country, let's start with the why and the purpose. If truly the purpose of education is to build citizens who are ready for the world, if it is to develop and nurture kids who can take on life's challenges, then what we need to build and measure are 21st century skills and critical thinking and communication and courage and compassion and curiosity and consciousness and so much more. Now I'm going to pause because I spoke a lot about this word called leadership. I want you to close your eyes for a minute and think about a leader who you really admire. Who comes to mind? Now open your eyes. Do you see that leader on the screen? I've done this enough times to probably take a wild guess that most of you will see that leader on the screen. Now, studies have shown us that when we think of leaders, we usually don't think of women. But don't worry, that's probably for another talk. Today I won't get into that. What I want to question is this. Why is it that when we think of leaders, we also don't think of kids? Why is it that leaders can only be 21 years old or older? When we know world over, kids have the ability to change and shape the world. What Qasim and Kajal and Shivam and Muskan demonstrated is leadership. We know that the complex problem of this education crisis can't be solved by teachers alone. We know that school leaders and policymakers and governments and the corporate sector and health and sanitation and nutrition, all of these have a part to play. But the piece that is most missing in our debates about education, the stakeholder that we're not talking about today, are kids. Education cannot continue to be something that happens to our kids. It has to happen with our kids, for our kids. And this isn't a new idea either. Organizations like IDEO have spoken at length about design thinking and that the most robust solutions only come by when we really think about the end user, when we listen to them and learn from them and deeply empathize with them. Then why is it that we don't talk about the impact of our policies and textbooks and exams on kids? Why aren't we learning from kids? Why aren't we giving them a voice? Why aren't we giving them a seat at the table? If I can just negotiate for one how, a big how that needs to shift in how education happens, it's this. It needs to start happening in partnership with our kids. But this is tough, and this is a lesson we've only learned ourselves much too recently. Remember that statistic I spoke about when 80% of 1,000 ninth graders were failing math? Well, we had tried everything for years. We had tried all the whats. The lesson plans, the tests. We had reached out to experts and nothing was working until it finally dawned upon us to ask our kids. And our kids told us, well, they didn't like math. They didn't enjoy math. They'd been told that they would never be good at math. And they didn't understand how math was connected to their lives. Now, armed with these insights, we decided we weren't just going to focus on academics. We started thinking about how to make math fun. We worked on mindsets and we told our kids that they could do math. We showed them early success. We realized that hands-on experiments shouldn't just be reserved for science, but they were critical in math to show to our kids the relevance of math in our lives. And in just 5 months, when we worked on all of these things together, 80% of our kids started passing math. These experiments showed us the leadership that is latent in our kids and what is possible when we just change the how of teaching and learning. We then tried many more experiments and started taking our kids with us to the Delhi police, to the Rashtrapati Bhavan, to Mr. Manish Sisodia, and we learned that kids are surfacing important issues, insights, and nuances that must become parts of our critical decision-making processes that ultimately impact our kids. But like I said, this is not easy because for years we've been told that kids listen to adults, not the other way around. But try we must. And today across our organization, we're trying to change our how in classrooms, in schools, but also in our board meetings. We make sure that our heads of organizations like Thermax and McKinsey and Godrej are sitting next to kids like Priyanka who also serve on our board, and that their insights together are taken into consideration when we make these big decisions. We need to change our how. As I end my talk, I just want to remind us that all of us have a role to play at all levels. We all need to take a part and change the future. Our past has been about our collective failure, and we've really obsessed on the what's of education. But let's make our future about our collective success. Let us first renegotiate the purpose of education, the why we educate in the first place. And let us promise ourselves that a big shift in our how has to be that education can no longer just happen to our kids. It needs to happen with our kids and for our kids. Thank you.